Hi everyone, welcome to another video lecture. This time we're going to be talking about what human rights are and the definition um, of them and the UDHR, this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We're going to be looking at the history of human rights, where they come from, and exploring some of the similarities and differences between different cultures and how they've come about. These two ideas are really going to be related to two of our big learning targets. Our first two, your ability to define human rights and explain both how they are and how they're not universal. We'll also be looking at that over the next couple of days. And the second one being your ability to describe and evaluate the UDHR, this Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we're going to be working on together again in the next couple of days. So, what are human rights? You should be filling this in on that front page of that packet that you've been given. So, human rights are the conditions and the freedoms that all people are entitled to simply because they are humans. If you take the conditions and freedoms, put it together, that means rights. So, essentially, it's anything that we as humans that we know that we should all have, no matter what, we have that. It's about the way that people deserve to be treated. And we're going to talk about that. It might sound familiar about that golden rule. We're going to get to that in just a little bit. And not only is it by each other, but also by governments as well. So it does have that political element to it there. And even though these rights aren't always protected, the idea that I want you to be thinking about is that human rights should be protected. And this is really the focal point of what we're going to be getting at as we start to explore human rights and what they do and what they don't do for people. So, just a brief history. There's a lot of information here. I'm going to go through kind of quickly. Feel free to pause and explore a little bit more. But really, I just want you to get a basic understanding of where they come from, why we have them, etc. So be sure to be jotting some of these things down on that notes page. So, some early ideas. Throughout much of history, people have acquired their rights and responsibilities through different memberships and groups. And these groups are gonna establish different ideas for what human rights should be. So, what kind of groups? Family, native nations, religion, class, community, states, these ideas, these different groups that we're a part of, all of these things together are really going to establish different human rights for themselves. As we talked about a moment ago, this golden rule, you can see here in a variety of different religions, most of these we've covered, you can see here they have some aspect of this golden rule. Essentially, do unto others as you would want done unto you, meaning, treat others how you want to be treated. Again, feel free to pause and take a look at some of these more in-depthly in what they say, but they're all based around this golden rule. Here's some more explanation of a variety of different texts in different religions. We talk about the Quran, the Christian Bible, Vedas, we see the Hebrew Torah. All of these address and are some of the oldest forms of sources in which they address people's rights, duties, and responsibilities. There's another example of some Native American sources. And in fact, all societies, oral, written tradition, no matter what it is, have some sort of system in place of justice and what it means to be decent to one another. And so you can see this emphasis in earliest of cultures on how we are supposed to treat one another, even if they weren't quote unquote known as rights or human rights. The beginning of human rights documents. There's a variety of sources in our history as people that we see these actually written down and brought into the framework of societies. The Magna Carta in Britain, the English Bill of Rights, the French Declaration on the Rights of Man and Citizen, and the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. We have those first 10 amendments, called the Bill of Rights, which are pretty much establishing our human rights as American citizens. All of these are considered some of the earliest documented foundations of what we consider as human beings to be considered rights. Yet a lot of times when they're translated, they're going to exclude a lot of groups. Here you can see a photo, a very famous photo of a slave being beaten and whipped. And a lot of times these documents, once they're put into law, are going to exclude women, people of different color, members of certain social religions, of societies and religions, economic, political groups, sexual orientation, gender identity, things like that. These are all part of groups that are considered to be oppressed. Remember that word from globalization we talked about? And so nevertheless, these groups are still going to be using these foundations as the basis for their demands for basic human rights and freedoms. So even though it's people who have taken these documents and flipped it on them and to exclude them, they're still going to say, hey, look, we have this document in place of all people are supposed to be treated a certain way, and that's how we're going to fight for our rights. So, in more modern times, we see that the UN has had a pretty important role in looking at human rights, and the establishment of the UN in and of itself has been based around human rights. We see in the 1860s different organizations like the Red Cross create different sorts of policies and things called Geneva Conventions for how we treat prisoners of war, POWs, and civilians. We see in the early 20th century, we see other types of organizations creating different establishments for their laws. The birth of the United Nations, as I mentioned, this really came about after World War II. When the world stopped after World War II and took a look at the atrocities, not just of Jews, but of gypsies, homosexuals, people with disabilities, it was pretty horrifying. And so when the UN was created, based around this idea of human rights, really was their focal point after World War II because of what the world had done to itself. There were trials being held, crimes against peace, crimes against humanity. It's probably a term you've heard before. These are ideas that really came about, again, after World War II, when the world was forced to step back and really take a look at what it had done to itself and to its people. Here's the UN symbol right here. Other governments have worked to establish elements within the UN, goals for how do we deal with conflicts, how we make international peace. The idea is that people want to ensure that this will never happen again, that people will never be denied of their life, freedoms, food, shelter, nationality in an unjust way. Now, as you can imagine, this is still going on today, and this is the debate that we're going to be getting into when we get through human rights and into genocide as well. But this is really the focal point of a lot of governments in this world, is to make sure that things like the Holocaust and genocides like that never happen again. This is just some more history of the US and how we see more of these things coming about. Feel free to stop and read this. So, that UDHR I mentioned, that Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Member states of the United Nations, they pledge to promote respect for human rights for all people. And the idea behind this was that if they can establish a group called the Commission on Human Rights to be able to draft some sort of document that really explains, okay, here are the rights that all people have, then we cannot deny them anymore because it's in written form. We all can agree to it. We all know what they are. Everyone has the same idea of what human rights are, so that no one can say, well, I see how you might think it's human right, but really I don't see it that way. In this case, we're going to have a clear definition so everybody knows. This was guided by Franklin Delano Roosevelt's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. Here she is in the middle here. She was really instrumental in her time in office in the late 30s and 40s, and even later on after that, after World War II, when she was still living, to really work on this idea of the UDHR. Here she is holding it up. So on December 10, 1948, the UDHR was adopted by the 56 members of the United Nations. The vote was unanimous, meaning everyone voted to adopt it, but there were 8 nations that chose not to vote. And if you're going to become a member state today, this is something that you have to adopt. So even, what are we, almost 60 years or almost 70 years later, you still need to adopt this policy and this Declaration of Human Rights. So, the UDHR extended the revolution in international law, again, as a means to try and promote this as an international concern, not something that's just domestic, meaning not something that's just within a basic framework of a government in one nation. These are all interdependent, meaning they all work together, and they're indivisible, meaning they're not broken apart. You can't take one without the other. All of them need to work together. Feel free to read the preamble, meaning sort of like the intro paragraph of it. This is a really key element of understanding what this is all about. So feel free to pause the video and read that. The influence of the UDHR has been substantial. We see lots of principles being incorporated in different constitutions all across the world, especially in the 185 plus nations that are now part of the UN. I think it's actually 187 or 8 now, but we still can see lots of different nations a part of the UN. And although it's not legally binding, and that is key, it's not legally binding, it is still customary for international law to use this format in order to achieve human rights for all people. Now, you'll see under that spot on your notes where it says, what are human rights? There's 2 terms, universalism and relativism. These are the last parts of this video I want to get to. These are key elements that you're going to be getting to in your learning target check at the end of the week. This idea of universalism is that it's a belief that some people believe that rights belong to everyone all the time, no matter what. So all rights, all people, all the time, no matter what. No matter what culture you are, no excuses for limiting rights. You are always, no matter what the situation is, guaranteed these rights. And it's never okay to limit this. They believe that all people here are supposed to have these rights protected because it is our natural God-given right as a human being that is breathing on in this world to have these rights. Now, on the other side, there's this idea of relativism. Other people believe that there's no such thing as a truly universal right. That as we get into these 30 declarations on human rights that we'll explore in a couple of days, that some of them it's okay, depending on the situation, to violate. For example, different cultures might have different ideas, and maybe it's not appropriate to practice all of those things within cultures. And to force cultures to do it, it's considered wrong. Different situations may make it necessary for governments to limit rights. What do you do during war? Maybe you need to limit those rights. Rights are just how the people in a group agreed to treat each other. It doesn't mean that it always needs to be that way. And so you see it's a spectrum. You see one side as universalism, the other side is relativism. The question is, where do your beliefs fit? And this is something I want you to be thinking about over the next couple of days, especially as you get to that learning target check where I'm going to be asking you to work with these ideas, is based on what you will see in the UDHR, where do you fall? Are you someone who believes that they're always guaranteed no matter what? Or it's situational. It depends on what's going on. Now, that's a lot of information. Feel free to pause and rewind and go back. We'll be talking more about this in class. Hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for listening.